Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a wonderful presentation, Classroom Strategies, Part 1, Transitions, How to Make Transitions Easier, presented by Merceydes Morassi, LMHC, and BCBA. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's actually should say part 2. Sorry about that, because yesterday we started with part 1 with the transitions, and then we're going to just kind of pick up where we left off. So talking about how to make transitions easier. When we left off yesterday, we had left off talking about schedules, and I think schedules are super important. So just to retouch real fast, we had talked on how to make schedules where we're alternating between non-preferred and preferred activities so as to contrive motivation. But also, like, there are some other tips we could apply. For example, transitions can be made easier if there's something reinforcing that immediately follows the non-preferred task and is only available after the task has been completed. If you remember from yesterday, those of you that were here, I gave the example of maybe we do some kind of work task that the kids don't really like let's say it's math, but immediately following math, there's some song, and the song that I used was The Floor is Lava, and that they could only access that song after this task is complete. So I give a similar example in this, maybe after math, we put on a dancing song or a cartoon, something that's like very high up in the preference hierarchy or the reinforcement hierarchy. But the important part, again, which we touched on yesterday, was that it's contingent. So the song and the cartoon is only available following the non-preferred task. They cannot access it at any other time, no matter what. That part, super important that we hold to our contingencies. Also, another suggestion is a warm-up task to create momentum or to contrive interest. So for example, if we're going to start with math problems, say like multiplication problems, maybe we have them out loud say the answers to easy problems like 1 + 1 before they start the worksheet. So the idea behind this is that, look, we're going to give you math, right? And it's difficult math, which they're going to dread. This is hypothetical, saying that we have the kids that don't like math. I know there's always a kid out there who does. I was one, right? But let's say these kids don't like math, or say, all right, we're going to do multiplication, and they're probably like, oh. But if we can warm them up by like, all right, let's just throw out some easy ones. What is 1 + 1? And that's obviously too easy, but we could say, okay, who can do 1 × 2? And then kind of they say, oh, they essentially start thinking like, oh, okay, well, I can do this, or I can warm up to this. This isn't as bad as I thought it was. Also, another example is if we're going to read a book, maybe they're not the biggest fans of reading or reading/comprehension related activities. One thing we can do is show them the cover and have them guess what the story is going to be about. So facilitate some kind of discussion about the activity before we move into the activity. That prevents kind of a cold start, and that can help create some degree. It's not necessarily behavioral momentum in the same way I explained it yesterday, but it can create some sort of interest and make this transition into what is a non-preferred task feel less aversive. Uh, the other thing we really should probably consider is how to make the non-preferred task more repetitive. How do we make it something that they would like a little bit more? So there's a lot of examples on how to do this. So for example, if every Monday you went into work and they had donuts or very fancy coffee, like they went and got Starbucks for everybody every Monday, you would dread Mondays a lot less. That's actually something we see applied all the time in like workplace settings for adults, is that they try to make break rooms more, they fill them with goodies, or they try to create some sort of work environment that makes people want to go to work or want to pay attention at work. We can do that same thing in the classroom. So for example, if we're transitioning kids into the classroom from recess, which no one wants to leave recess, we want to just stay playing all day, right? But if we bring them in from recess, what if when they came in from recess, they get like candy or stickers or something like that? They're coming in, not just coming in to come in, but if we're coming in from recess knowing that we're going to start something more difficult, let's make that non-preferred task maybe it's still difficult, but maybe it could also be reinforcing in some regard too. So, all right, guys, pull out your math books. Let's get started. And as they're pulling out their math books, we come along with a sticker or a candy, or maybe we play some fun music as they're coming in, something to make it so that math is less dreary. So then also we could look at making the transition process itself fun or more fun. This is why there is a cleanup song, because it makes the cleaning up part less aversive. You know, everyone knows the cleanup song, right? Clean up, everybody everywhere. It's a good song, you know, that kids can sing along to, but it doesn't necessarily make it so that they're more likely to clean up because it's a song. It makes it so they're more likely to clean up because cleanup has become less aversive. Now they're singing a song. It's a thing that we're doing. It's kind of, it almost adds a game element to this whole thing. So we can find a song to sing or play when transitions are occurring, or we can encourage them to transition to and from one location or one activity in a fun way. I think the easiest example for this is from location to location. So if they're coming in from recess or from lunch or something like that, we can have them do that transition in a creative or fun way. Granted, I know a lot of times we're worried about the noise that these kids will make when they're transitioning down the hallway from one room to the other, which might inhibit your ability to be creative with this. But one thing I was thinking, you could say, okay, everybody tiptoe as quietly and slowly as possible to the table, as if you were a monster trying to hide in the closet and you don't want anyone to find you. Or, you know, everybody walk through the hallways like you're a CIA agent and be super quiet and see, you know, like we have to gamify it in the same way we essentially created a cleanup song for cleaning up. We turn this transition into a game. Another example I get was, all right, everybody put your backpacks away and then hop on one foot back to your desk. When you get to your desk, shout out your favorite food. It sounds ridiculous, but it's out of the ordinary and it could be somewhat fun. It's going to be a noisy few minutes. Everyone puts away their backpack, right? But then they come in here, mac and cheese, pizza. It was noisy for a couple of minutes, but it made the whole process of going back to the desk, going back to the work location, it made it more fun in itself. And sometimes that's enough to avoid some of the problem behavior that can occur. Like, for example, we were talking about the problem behavior yesterday. A lot of it oftentimes could be like tantrums. So if you have a kid who doesn't want to, you know, coming in from recess or coming from home with the backpack on, usually you say, okay, go put your backpacks down. Everyone come to your desk and pull out your books. And this is the kid who tantrums or throws himself to the floor, throws the backpack. Imagine if you told that kid, all right, I want everyone to put their backpacks away, hop on one foot back to the desk. And then when you get there, shout out their favorite food. You're going to catch him off guard. He's going to be like, what? Wait, and maybe he'll be interested. Well, this sounds like fun. Let me do this. That's a win. Like that's a win for the day. I can't promise it'll be a win forever, but it is a win for the day. So another thing we can do when we anticipate problem behavior is we can allow what they call a transitional object to come to the non-preferred tasks. Research by Coe et al. Below says that this can be really helpful if we do this along with a warning. So if you remember from yesterday, warnings alone are not enough to abate or avoid problem behavior. Warnings are helpful, but they need to be used in conjunction with something. So from this study, they said a transitional object plus the warning can be helpful. Transitional objects can be anything, okay? So I think the classic transitional object example that we can think of is like a stuffed animal, but kids might not have their stuffed animal with them, or little kids will have like their baby blankets that they take with them everywhere. Again, probably not the best example for in class, but in class, maybe they can take something with them from where they were at inside. So, or to the desk or to wherever they're going. If they're outside playing recess, you don't want them to necessarily bring a toy in because that's going to be distracting, but I'm thinking of a preschool that I was at where they had like all sorts of it was like a bunch of trees. They had leaves everywhere and like little pieces of mulch, and the kids would always play in that. So it's all right, why don't you grab your favorite leaf and bring that in with you, or grab your favorite pencil, something that they can bring with them, which might help them feel like they're almost like they're leaving behind less, right? Because if I'm saying, okay, put away all of this and come do this thing you don't want to do, in this way, I'm saying, okay, put away most of this, but you can take that with you back to the desk. And so do be careful that it's not something that's going to be too distracting, and that it's not a favorite toy or something like that. Also, one thing we can try is to engage the child in something similar, or to see if we can get them to gravitate towards the location of the new activity for some other reason. All right, so this one might be a little bit more difficult. So if I'm going to have them working on, again, math, right? Maybe we can start by, before we're transitioning or while we're transitioning, counting or doing something in that relation, right? How old are you? Okay. And how old is so and so? And how old is your brother or sister? And how many years older are you than them, or something like this, to just get them started in the process. Kind of similar to what I talked about before, of the idea of like showing them the book cover. But an example of this that is kind of new for this presentation is, I put, if you like doing an I Spy walk, I think this is a good idea if you're moving from location to location. So we're trying to get them inside, or we're trying to get them to a location they don't want to go. Maybe they don't want to go to the PE classroom. That's what they don't want to go. Instead of saying, okay, let's go to the PE classroom or let's go inside, let's just start walking in that direction without saying why we're walking in that direction. So, all right, guys, let's go this way. And I want everybody to pay attention as we walk this way for anything red that they see. And if you see something red, say, I spy something red. And so in that regard, we're getting them closer and closer and closer. So that way, when we say, all right, we're going to go inside to the PE room, we're already most of the way there. It's not going to necessarily, completely diminish the problem behavior, but we've gotten a successful jump on it to some degree. And other things I think that you can engage them in, something similar. Maybe you could have them, before we're going to start like a reading comprehension task, something that's associated with being a task, pull out something else that is reading, maybe like a comic book, that doesn't feel like a task. And so we can start there and then kind of roll that into where it's going, or show a video clip of the relative to the book that we're about to read. This part's really important because in all the preventative stuff, it's very good that we do everything we can prevention wise. But the biggest obstacle is how we deal with the problem behavior once it arises, because it's what you do at that point that determines if the problem behavior is going to continue or if it's going to stop. So the most important thing that you can remember is, no matter what this child is doing, yelling, screaming, throwing themselves on the floor, whatever, we cannot allow it to delay or to avoid the transition to the next activity. This will almost always ensure that the problems will continue. We call this reinforcement. So what happens is, if I don't want to do my math worksheet and you put it in front of me and then I tantrum, I scream and I yell and I scream and I yell, and you come and you take away the worksheet. Okay, all right, calm down. Shh, keep your voices down. As soon as you take away the worksheet, I won. And what I just learned in all of that is, okay, every time I don't want to do something, I'm in a tantrum, and then they'll remove the thing that I don't like. And you might say, well, I would never remove it. I would leave it right there. Good, leave it right there. One other thing though is that they might learn, the more I tantrum and cry and throw things around, the more I delay it. And if I can just delay it just long enough to get to the lunch bell or to get to the end of the day bell or whatever, then I'm not going to have to do it. And so, not that you can, physically grab them and make them write it. You can't do that, right? So what you can do is you can continue to just present it in front of them and stand there with your finger essentially pointing at it, indicating this is going to happen. This is going to happen whether you want it to or not. So we want to make sure if we just say, if we let them tantrum and we walk away, it's almost like we're saying, do your thing. You don't have to do the work. If we stand there while still holding the work on the table, pointing to the work on the table, we're making it clear, not necessarily with words, because sometimes we use too much words. We're making it clear by our presence and the gestural prompt pointing at this assignment. We're making it clear that this has to be done. The tantrum is not going to get you out of it. One thing we can do, we can remind them what comes after the math assignment. Now, this is important to piggyback off of what we talked about yesterday. If you have a great schedule, I think the best thing to do is before you transition to the, like I was going to call it the problem assignment, before you transition to the non-preferred activity, pull up the schedule, remind them. All right, everyone. All right, we're going to move into math now. And remember, after math, we're going to do this great thing. Okay. And it's best if you remind them before any problem behavior happens. After the problem behavior happens, we don't love to remind them, but we do, right? We have to. Just don't remind them excessively. So let's say the tantrum starts. You're going to want to remind this person, hey, remember, the sooner you get this done, the sooner we can move on to this good thing that follows. But really, don't talk too much after that. Like, make it clear, this is what the contingency is, redirect them back to the task, remind them that's the only way they gain access to that preferred item. So like, again, if it's the floor is lava, the sooner you get through this math, the sooner we get to the floor is lava. And if the math doesn't get done, then there's no floor is lava today or tomorrow. Until the math gets done, we're not doing it. That part has to be super clear. And also, some of this stuff, I will say, like, depends on the history they have with the teacher. If they know that this teacher means business, what she says is what she does, then when she places a contingency like that, like, for example, if this math doesn't get done, we don't go to this assignment. If that comes from a teacher who has a history of being consistent, kids know. They're like, oh, she means business. So I think that's one thing also we can work on as adults, is being very consistent. What we say is what we do, because kids, they get it. They understand the difference between a consistent authority figure and one that is not. Let's see. Yes. Okay. So some more tips on dealing with the problem behavior. Do not allow them to continue working on something else or to stall. So this isn't a negotiation. If they don't want to do math, we don't say, oh, okay, well, don't do math. Instead, just do some reading. Nope, because if you do that, you are essentially reinforcing the problem behavior. You're teaching them that if you don't want something, tantrum, and I will accommodate you in some way. So nope, they cannot choose something else. It has to be the math, period. And then again, not letting them stall. Stalling is another way of avoidance. So there's flat out avoidance, not doing, and then there's delay and stalling, which fall in the same category of behavioral functions for us. Okay, we look at them as almost the same thing. We need to make sure we remove anything that could be reinforcing and continue to redirect to the task. Do not allow them to access anything else that could be reinforcing. So we don't want them talking to friends. We don't want them playing with anything. We don't want them pulling anything out of their backpack. Nope, you need to do what you're doing here. And the redirection, which this is bullet number 3, do not provide too much attention here. This does not need to be over-explained. I can't explain that enough. I need to over-explain that part here. We have a tendency to use too many words. We don't need to use so many words. Once you have told this child what is expected, you've reminded them of the contingencies in place. Okay. We don't need to continue conversing. We don't need to say, why are you doing this? I don't understand why you're behaving this way or anything. When you start providing attention to the problem behavior, you might be reinforcing it with attention. Some kids actually prefer that type of negative attention. We don't call it negative attention in behavior analysis, but in the rest of the world would call it a negative attention, right? Where someone's pointing their finger or someone's disappointed or saying, look at Johnny, he's not doing the right thing. Some kids actually prefer that type of attention as opposed to praise or high fives. Do not provide too much attention here. When I was saying before, point, use your gestures to point back to the task. Don't make a ton of eye contact with the kid. Don't continue to reiterate things. Once you've explained it, given a reminder, talked about the contingency, that's enough. This person understands what you're talking about. So I think that part is something that a lot of adults could work on, is just choosing fewer words. Okay. So some potential suggestions. There are definitely some other things we can do. Okay. This is something I thought about. Oftentimes in classrooms, there's two kids that goof off. They are like buddies and they're always goofing off, and the teachers end up separating them. They're like, they can't sit together because they're too chaotic or whatever. During these really non-preferred tasks, especially if either one of those kids has a problem with the non-preferred task, maybe that's when you do let them sit together, because you're essentially adding a fun element to something they don't want to do. And if they know the only time they get to sit together and goof a little bit, because you have to expect they're going to goof a little bit, the only time they get to do that is during math, they might actually start looking forward to math. And you can have a contingency there too. Listen, I'm going to let you guys sit together during math as long as you get most of your work done and the noise doesn't get too loud. And keep in mind, there's going to be noise, so don't be unrealistic about that expectation. But they might actually look at that as an opportunity for like, oh my gosh, okay, let's try to get some stuff done so we can chat a little bit or play a little bit. And then if it doesn't work out, right, if they're not getting anything done, they go back to being separated. And then you can try again, maybe a few days later. All right, I'm going to give you another chance, but you got to make sure to get work done. But having that other student there that they love, that's their buddy, that might turn the whole aversive activity into a positive in itself. Now, all of a sudden, the kids are running for math because they get to sit by each other. So something like that. An example I gave, or what I said you could do here, is if you're going to do that with two kids that are somewhat hyperactive or talkative or whatever, probably a good idea to have them in front of you so that you can give them a lot of redirection, but allow them to socialize, allow them to goof off. You know that that's what is essentially making this task more fun for them. We need to analyze the setting. All right, I like to say analyze the setting using all 5 of your senses, because I don't think we think about that. Like, for example, I'm so used to this light, it doesn't bother me, but it might bother you guys because you're having to look at it from this direction. I don't even notice or think about it anymore. We almost have to do that, especially if it's like if there's a transition to a new location and it's that transition to a new location that's problematic. I want you to think about every single thing sensory wise that exists in the new location. What's the lighting like? What are the visuals? Is there blank walls or are there things all over the walls? Is there different colors? What are the smells? Does it smell good? Does it smell bad? Maybe it smells bad. Maybe one of the transitions that you make, you have to pass the cafeteria and the cafeteria is super stinky and the kids don't want to walk past it. Like, there are so many things about the transition itself or about the new location, sensory wise, that could be problematic or aversive to these kids. So one thing we can look at is maybe we need to change the lighting. Maybe we could dim the lights or switch out LED bulbs, if that's even an option, for a different type of more natural light. Maybe we can add music during aversive tasks. So if we're going to give them math, maybe we put on some quiet music in the background that is a little bit fun or engaging. That's actually not always a bad idea. That can even be helpful sometimes for kids with other like developmental disorders. So we could wear a sock puppet that praises kids. And this I wouldn't recommend for high school or probably middle school, because I think they would hate that. But in elementary school, that might be funny, that the sock puppet only comes out when they're doing math, and he just walks around during math and says, oh, look at you, good job, you figured it out, right? That's the only time the sock puppet comes out. So everyone's looking forward to math because they're going to laugh at the sock puppet. We can add movement. And by the way, in the PowerPoint, when it says A/N, that means aversive/neutral. So if this is an aversive task they don't want to do, or a neutral task they're just not looking forward to, whatever, that being the point. We can add movement to a aversive or neutral task. These kids spend a lot of time sitting. Most kids nowadays are far too sedentary in lifestyle, so the movement is good on many realms, right? So let's maybe give them something to do movement wise in them chair, or get them out of the chair a little bit. That can make the task itself more fun. So like, again, math, that's the one I go to because I know a lot of people don't like math. If math is about something like simple addition, okay, what's the answer to number 3? The answer to number 3 is 4. Okay, do 4 jumping jacks. Okay, what's the answer to number 6? The answer to number 6 is 2. Okay, do 2 push-ups, something like that. They might like it, they might not. You want to play with that one and see, but a lot of kids are kind of eager for something to do physically. They want to move in some way. We can add a 3-dimensional element or a crafty element. I really like this idea. I like the idea of like letting them be a little bit more creative. So for example, if they're doing math using counters, a lot of times the counters that we use are the ones that look like kind of like Lego blocks, I guess. What if we have them make the counters themselves? Like, maybe a couple days before we do like a little arts and crafts type thing, and we have them create their own counters. Now, I'm sure, Michael's or Hobby Lobby would have a ton of options for how we can do that. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of any, but I know it's possible. The idea would be when we go to do math and then we present the counters that they made, those are more familiar, and the counters themselves are paired with reinforcement. And what that means, you guys probably heard about Pavlov, right? Pavlov and his dogs, and how he rang the bell and they were salivating for the meat, but eventually they just started salivating when they heard the bell and there wasn't even meat. That's pairing. And so in behaviorism, we look at certain stimuli that are paired together, meaning that sometimes stimuli that are not necessarily reinforcing in themselves, like just they're neutral. It's just a thing. It's just a counter. It doesn't have anything good or bad qualities about it. But because they made these counters themselves, and during the time that they were making it, they were having fun, they were doing crafts, the counter now feels like something positive to them. The stimulus itself is now associated with so much positivity that they like the counter. So when you pull out that counter, it's very different than pulling out the one that looks like a Lego. The one that looks like a Lego is probably associated with, several lessons where they were bored and they were doing math. The one that they made is associated with a good time. They're going to be more inclined to want to use that and feel more positive about the activity. So not just counters, that's the example I gave, but you could try to think of different, like maybe they make their own bookmarks and then they can use those in the books. Or, you guys might remember old school, we would have to make our own book covers, and we would make them with like brown paper bags and then design them. But then that made the book itself more reinforcing because we made the cover. So think about how you can add a crafty element to some of your lessons that they do a day or so before, and you introduce it during an aversive task. You make that task less aversive because of that little crafty element. So yeah, I guess that brings us to our questions and answers. Happy to answer any questions. Go ahead. If you want, you can put them directly in the chat box, and then I can answer them from there. I will say just a few other tips. You want to try to be creative and think of things that you can do in the environment, but that don't necessarily stay in the environment permanently. For example, a lot of teachers will like decorate their class, which is great. And I think that's very inviting and the kids like that. But that essentially becomes part of the class all the time. It's not associated with this one particular activity. So if you have an aversive activity, that's when you want to find a way to make the environment change a little bit during that activity so as to stimulate interest. Again, maybe maybe you find some weird lighting something, and you only turn it on when they're doing math or when they're doing something they don't like, or you put on the music when they're doing the math or the thing that they don't like, or maybe you have something that smells good, some kind of like diffuser with good smells. Maybe that comes on during math. So I think there's a lot of different things we can think of, probably too many to list or to name, but you do want to be creative about how to add that element to something that is typically considered aversive to these kids. I still don't see any questions, but we can obviously stick around. We have time, so stick around for a few more minutes and see if any pop up.